I thought it was just another grocery delivery. Penthouse suite, fancy name, probably a maid at the door. But when I knocked, an older woman answered. She looked elegant and completely alone. Then she said something I wasn't expecting. "Would you mind staying for a minute?" I almost said no. But that minute turned into tea, a conversation and a friendship I never saw coming. It was her husband's birthday. He'd been gone for years, and somehow I became the person she needed that day. The elevator doors opened with a gentle ding, followed by a whoosh of warm air that smelled faintly of jasmine and old wood. Eli stepped out balancing two brown paper bags in his arms. The 24th floor of the Somerset residences was always quiet. Too quiet. Carpeted halls swallowed his footsteps. The walls were lined with carefully framed black and white photos of a city skyline from decades past. It felt more like a museum than an apartment building. Apartment 2403 was at the very end of the hall. Eli glanced at the nameplate out of habit. A.M. Sinclair. He had delivered groceries here twice before, and always the same list, always prepaid, always no tip, and always no answer at the door. Someone on the other side must have heard the doorbell and retrieved the bag afterward, but today was different. He rang the bell and waited. To his surprise, the door opened. A woman stood in the doorway, her posture regal yet softened by age. She wore a deep green cardigan buttoned up to her collarbone and had thick white hair pulled back into a clip. Her face was elegant but tired, her eyes distant and pale blue. "You're early," she said with a faint smile. Eli blinked and unsure how to respond. "Sorry," he said quickly, shifting the bags in his arms. "I think the app gave me a faster route today. Traffic was light," she nodded absently. "That's fine. Come in." He hesitated. "I usually just leave them at the door." "Right," she said, "but would you mind bringing them in?" "My wrists aren't what they used to be." Something about the way she said it made him pause. She wasn't pushy, just tired, so he nodded and stepped inside. The penthouse was drenched in soft, natural light. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city skyline. But what caught his attention was how still everything was, like the apartment had been frozen in time. Crystal figurines lined the fireplace. An antique piano stood untouched in the corner. "Just there, please," she said, gesturing toward the kitchen island. Eli set the bags down carefully. "Thank you, young man," she said, walking slowly over. "What's your name, Eli?" he said. "I'm Eleanor." "Eleanor Sinclair." He nodded politely. "Would you stay a minute?" Her voice was quieter now. Eli looked toward the door. I'm technically not supposed to." "It's my husband's birthday," she said suddenly. The words landed between them with a strange softness. She looked down at the counter, her fingers brushing one of the bags. "He passed away last year. I don't know why. I ordered groceries. I'm not even hungry. I just—" She trailed off, then looked up with a weary smile. "Would you mind staying for a cup of tea, just a minute?" Eli hesitated. There were more deliveries to make, more faces to not remember, more doors to not enter. But something in her expression, a gentle kind of ache, held him still. "Sure," he said quietly. "I can stay a minute." They sat in the small breakfast nook tucked in the corner of the kitchen. Eleanor poured tea from a china set that looked older than Eli's mother. The kettle had been kept warm on the stove. He suspected she'd been planning this moment before he ever rang the bell. She handed him a delicate porcelain cup. He took it carefully, as if it might shatter in his hands. "You're very kind," she said. "Most people would have said no. I guess I'm not most people." A faint smile touched her lips. They sat in silence for a while. Eli wasn't used to silence that didn't feel awkward. Somehow here it was just quiet, peaceful. So Eleanor said after a few sips, "Do you deliver groceries full-time?" He shook his head. "Nah, just part-time. Pays the bills. I do some freelance writing too. Articles mostly. Nothing fancy." "Ah, a writer," she mused. "My husband loved writers. He used to quote poetry at dinner. Sometimes too much," she laughed gently. "But I didn't mind." "What did he do, Professor?" "Literature. University of Washington for nearly 40 years. She stared out the window for a long moment. "He died quietly, heart failure in his sleep. I found him in the morning." Eli looked down at his cup. "I'm sorry," he said softly. She nodded. "Thank you." More silence. Then Eleanor stood, walked to the sideboard, and returned with a small framed photo. She placed it on the table. It showed a tall man with a full beard and bright, mischievous eyes. He was standing under a tree with blossoms falling around him, holding a book in one hand and waving with the other. "That was our last spring together," she said. "He loved cherry blossoms." "He looks alive," Eli said, then immediately winced. "Sorry, I mean—" "No," she interrupted, smiling. "You're right. He was alive. Fully, obnoxiously, beautifully alive." They both laughed gently. Time passed unnoticed. "I should probably head out," Eli said. "Of course," she said. "I kept you longer than a minute." "It's okay." "I didn't mind." She walked him to the door. "Thank you, Eli," she said quietly. "I didn't want to be alone today. And you didn't treat me like I was invisible. That means more than you know." He paused, then did something he didn't fully understand. He gently reached out and hugged her. She stiffened for a second, then softened into it. "I'll see you next week," he asked, stepping back. "I'd like that," she said. He nodded, then walked down the hall, suddenly unsure why he felt like he was leaving something important behind. Outside, the wind had picked up, rustling through the branches of a tree across the street. Eli sat in his car for a long moment before starting the engine. He didn't know why, but he looked up toward the 24th floor before driving off. Somewhere behind those windows, Eleanor was alone again, but maybe not as alone as before. Eli didn't mean for it to become a routine, but the following week he found himself watching the clock. When the delivery order for apartment 2403 popped up, he accepted it before the app finished blinking. He didn't even compare the payout, didn't care. He parked in the usual loading zone behind the Somerset residences and stepped out into the gray afternoon. 2 brown paper bags, again, lighter this time, tea cream, honey, some strawberries. No sign of urgency, just essentials or perhaps ritual. The elevator hummed as it climbed. He wasn't nervous exactly, just unsure. Would she answer again, or would it go back to silence behind the door? The bell echoed softly through the hallway, and then footsteps. The door opened. Eli, Eleanor said, smiling faintly as though she'd expected him. "Hi, Miss Sinclair," he said, shifting the bags. "I've got your order." "Come in," she said without hesitation. "And please, Eleanor, we've had tea together. That entitles you to drop the formality." He smiled and stepped inside. Everything was the same, the pale carpets, the quiet light, the scent of jasmine, and something floral he couldn't place. But this time, she had music playing softly in the background, a cello slow and mournful, like someone remembering something beautiful they couldn't touch anymore. She led him into the kitchen, and he set the bags down carefully. She began to unpack them, slowly, each movement deliberate, like part of a ceremony. "How are you today?" he asked. She glanced over her shoulder. "Woke up with all 10 fingers working and no fire in my hips. I'd say that's a small miracle." Eli chuckled. "That sounds promising." She turned and gave him a knowing look. "And you, any luck with your writing this week?" He blinked, surprised. "You remembered I'm not that old," she said dryly, though a hint of playfulness had danced in her voice. "Well, kind of. Submitted a piece about local bookshops. Might run in the community column." "That's lovely," she said. "You should bring me a copy." They fell into the rhythm more easily this time. She moved through the kitchen with slow but steady grace, setting water to boil, preparing the tea set. Eli offered to help, but she waved him off with a flick of her hand. "I like preparing it," she said. "It reminds me I'm still capable of doing something beautiful." That line stayed with him. Later, they were seated again in the breakfast nook, sipping Earl Grey and nibbling on shortbread cookies that Eleanor had taken from a decorative tin shaped like an old English carriage. "You never told me what your parents thought of your writing," she said suddenly. Eli shifted. "They don't really get it. My dad thinks it's soft work. My mom just wants me to have health insurance." Eleanor smiled. "That sounds about right. What about you?" he asked. "Any kids?" Her expression faltered, but only briefly. "No, we tried, but it wasn't in the cards for us. I had a miscarriage in my early 30s. After that, well, my husband said the world had enough people already. He said what mattered was how we loved the ones we did have in our lives." Eli swallowed hard. "I'm sorry." She shrugged gently. "It is what it is. I think I would have been a good mother, but I've made peace with it." She looked at him, something soft flickering behind her pale eyes. "You remind me of someone we used to mentor, a student of my husband's. He'd come over for dinner every Thursday night. My husband believed in feeding young minds and young stomachs. You have the same sort of quiet, searching presence. Eli wasn't sure what to say to that, so he just nodded. Then Eleanor reached beneath the table and pulled out a worn leather photo album. She placed it between them. I found this after you left last week. Thought maybe you'd indulge an old woman's trip down memory lane. She opened it, revealing faded photos, a younger Eleanor in Paris laughing with windblown hair, her husband tall and bearded, always holding a book or gesturing mid-sentence, friends' dinner parties, quiet holidays. They flipped pages together. She told stories, small ones, but vivid, about how he'd proposed riddles at breakfast, about how he'd read poems into her collarbone when he thought she was asleep, about the way he couldn't cook to save his life, but made perfect coffee every single morning for 30 years. Eli found himself listening harder than he expected to. He was never afraid of silence, she said, staring at a photo of him sitting on a garden bench, eyes closed in the sun. He taught me that silence can be a kind of music. But since he left, the silence feels heavier, less like a song, and more like a fog. Eli didn't answer right away, but he reached out and turned the page for her. That made her smile again. When he finally stood to leave, Eleanor didn't stop him. She just walked with him to the door. This doesn't have to be a one-time kindness, she said gently. If you ever find yourself delivering again on a Thursday afternoon, I'll have the kettle on. Eli met her eyes. Thursdays at 3. She nodded, if you're willing. He thought of the other stops, the rush, the endless noise of a city that never listened. And then he thought of the cello music, the photo albums, the smell of jasmine and lemon biscuits. I'm willing, he said. The next week, Eleanor had set 2 teacups before he even arrived. She wore a soft cream shawl and had tied her hair back with a velvet ribbon that looked brand new but probably wasn't. Eli noticed she'd moved a chair to face the window better. The clouds are doing something lovely today, she said as he sat. Would you describe them for me? He blinked. What do you mean? You're the writer, she said. Describe them like you would in a story. So he tried. They look like slow ships crossing an ocean of light, he said after a moment. Not in a hurry, just drifting. Eleanor's face lit up. See, that's what I mean. That's the kind of beauty that slips by if you don't catch it with words. From then on, they made it a tradition. Eli would describe something from the window clouds, birds, the flicker of leaves in the wind. Sometimes she'd correct him. Sometimes she'd add her own poetic twist. But it became a kind of shared game, a quiet collaboration. One day she handed him a yellowing notepad. Your turn, she said. Write something here while I put the kettle on. Anything, a paragraph, a sentence. Capture something real. Eli wasn't sure why he did it, but he opened the notepad and wrote, She brews tea like she's coaxing memory back into the room slowly with reverence, as if even steam deserves to be listened to. He left the page open, unsure if she'd read it. But when she returned and glanced at the bee, her eyes lingered. She didn't say anything, just smiled. It wasn't just tea anymore. They watched black and white movies. Eleanor had a VHS player that still worked and a collection of old tapes she hadn't touched in years. She showed him Roman Holiday, To Catch a Thief, Casablanca. They argued over endings, over the dignity of restraint in love, over how quiet gestures could say more than grand declarations. Eli started reading one of the books she recommended, A Room with a View. He hated the beginning but kept going because she said the last sentence would make him sigh. She was right. He began to feel strange during the rest of the week. Adrift like Thursdays had become the anchor, keeping him tethered to something gentle in a rough world. His other deliveries felt dull by comparison. No one else asked him about clouds. No one else remembered what he'd said the week before. No one else brewed memory into tea. One Thursday, Eleanor didn't answer the door right away. Eli knocked again. A full minute passed. Then he heard the lock turn. She opened the door slowly. Her eyes looked tired, her hair undone. I'm sorry, she said softly. I almost forgot what day it was. He stepped inside without thinking. You okay? She nodded, then hesitated. Today's the anniversary, not of his birth, of his leaving. Eli froze, unsure what to say. She led him to the nook, but didn't set the table. Just sat down with her hands folded in her lap. He died in the afternoon, she said. It was a Thursday. Eli sat across from her in silence. You don't have to talk. She said, I just didn't want to be alone for it this time. So he stayed. No tea, no cookies, no stories, just silence. A kind of wholly fragile silence. When the moment passed, Eleanor closed her eyes. A single tear slipped down her cheek, and she didn't brush it away. Eli didn't speak. He didn't move, but somehow he knew he was exactly where he needed to be. When he left that day, she walked him to the door as always, but this time she touched his arm gently. "Thank you, Eli," she whispered, for giving shape to the quiet. He didn't know how to explain the lump in his throat, so he just nodded. Eli didn't get the order notification that Thursday. He refreshed the app twice, then three more times. Even though he knew how the system worked, grocery deliveries went out automatically by neighborhood. If Eleanor had ordered, it would have come to him. He told himself maybe she'd skipped a week. Maybe she was out with friends. Maybe she'd finally visited her niece in Maine, like she'd mentioned, once eyes sparkling as though daring herself to believe it could happen. But none of those maybes fit the way the air sat in his chest heavy still. He waited an hour, then texted the number she'd written on the little card she'd tucked into his notebook weeks earlier. "Just checking in. Hope you're well. Eli." No reply. By evening, he couldn't sit still. He left his other orders in the queue and took the train across town. It was impulsive, probably too much. But Eleanor wasn't just a client anymore. She was a thread in his week, a hush in the noise of his world. The doorman at the Somerset residences recognized him and buzzed him up without question. Outside her door, he knocked twice. Waited. Nothing. He knocked again. "Eleanor, it's Eli." Still nothing. He stood there, palms sweating, unsure of what to do, until he heard soft shuffling behind the door. Then the click of the lock. The door opened an inch. It wasn't Eleanor. A younger woman, mid-40s, maybe peeked out, her eyes red-rimmed and cautious. "You're Eli?" she asked quietly. He nodded. "Is she okay?" The woman's voice cracked just slightly. "Well, as okay as anyone can be. I'm her niece. She had a fall earlier this week. Broke her hip. I've been staying here while she's in rehab." Eli's breath rushed out in a soundless exhale. "Oh God, is she coming home soon?" The woman hesitated. "She asked for you, right after surgery. She kept asking if it was Thursday." Eli swallowed hard. "Would you like to write her a note?" the woman asked gently. "I'm visiting her again tomorrow." "Could I actually visit?" The woman looked him over, uncertain. Then something shifted in her eyes, trust, or maybe just hope. "Yeah," she said softly. She'd like that. The rehab facility was quiet and smelled like linen and lemon disinfectant. Eleanor looked smaller in the hospital bed, paler, but her eyes lit up when she saw him. "Well," she whispered, "either I died and heaven serves tea, or you made good on your promise." "I came on a Friday this time," Eli said with a shy smile. "Hope that's not breaking our contract." She chuckled weakly. "Fridays are underrated." He pulled a chair up to her bedside. Her hand was wrapped in gauze, thin veins, pressing lightly against papery skin. "You scared me," he said softly. "You didn't answer. I didn't want you to see me like this," she admitted. "My pride's louder than my pain sometimes." "You're allowed to be human," he replied. They sat in silence for a while. Then he pulled a folded piece of paper from his jacket pocket. "I brought you something," he said. "Wrote it last night." He unfolded it and read aloud. "Some people leave footprints in the snow. Others light candles in dark rooms. And some brew tea so gently it feels like forgiveness steeping." Eleanor didn't speak for a long moment, but her eyes glistened. "You're becoming a real writer," she whispered. He smiled. "Only because you made me feel like my words could matter." Eleanor returned home weeks later. Eli helped her into the apartment, careful with every step. Her niece had arranged for a part-time nurse, but Eleanor insisted on walking through her front door on her own, leaning heavily on her cane but with her chin lifted. The apartment looked untouched, dustless, waiting like it had been holding its breath. She paused in the foyer. "I thought I might never see this again." "You're here now," Eli said gently. They didn't have tea that day. She needed rest. But before he left, she pressed a wrapped package into his hands. "What's this?" he asked. "A favor returned," she said softly. "Open it later." Back home, Eli sat on the edge of his bed and peeled the paper back. Inside was a hardbound journal leather cover. Thick, textured pages. Inside the first page, it in neat cursive. "For Eli, because some silences deserve to be written into song." He turned the next few pages. They were filled with short notes, some typed, some written in fountain pen, little snippets of Eleanor's memories, half-thoughts, quotes, forgotten dreams. She had copied passages from her husband's old lectures, recipes with personal notes in the margins, sketches of their garden from when she was young. It was a map of her interior world offered with no explanation, no condition, a bridge between them. He turned to the back cover. A folded note was tucked into the binding. I'm old, you know that. I feel it every morning. But if my time comes sooner than I'd like, I want you to have these pieces. You are the first person in years who really listened, who stayed, who didn't rush my grief or edit it for comfort. Keep writing. Keep staying soft. The world needs more people who steep instead of boil. They kept their Thursdays. Even after her nurse retired and Eleanor had to use a walker full-time, she insisted on preparing the tea herself slowly with purpose, and Eli always stayed. They talked about his latest freelance pieces, about her old love letters, about nothing and everything. Sometimes they sat in silence, but it was never heavy anymore. One day Eleanor asked him to read to her from his journal. He hesitated. It's not edited, just thoughts. I like your thoughts, she said. They're gentler than most. So he read. That summer, Eli stopped delivering groceries. He got a job as a junior copy editor at a small publishing house uptown. It didn't pay much, but it gave him health insurance, and more important, a desk with a window where he could describe clouds every morning. On his first day, he received a delivery to his office, a small white box tied with blue ribbon. Inside, a porcelain teacup and a short note. For your desk. Thursdays are always with you. E. Eleanor passed away peacefully in her sleep. Her niece called Eli the next morning. I know she'd want you to know, she said through tears. You were her bright spot, truly. He went to the memorial. It was small, just close friends and distant cousins. Someone read a poem. Someone else played cello. He didn't speak, but he brought the journal. Tucked inside one of Eleanor's scribbled notes read, Love isn't always loud. Sometimes it just shows up every Thursday. Now Eli keeps the journal on a shelf by his bed, and every Thursday, no matter what, he makes himself a cup of Earl Grey. He sits by his window, and he writes not always about her, but always because of her. Eli and Eleanor's story teaches us the profound impact of pausing to truly see and hear another person, especially in their moments of quiet pain. Eleanor's loneliness, masked by her elegant demeanor, and Eli's choice to stay beyond his delivery duties, reveal a universal truth. Small acts of kindness can weave lasting connections. Their Thursday teas, filled with shared silences, stories, and written words, show that listening with patience can transform grief into something softer, something shared. This resonates deeply in our fast-paced world, where we often overlook the elderly or those carrying invisible burdens. Eli's willingness to stay to write, to describe clouds, reminds us that being present is a gift that costs nothing but means everything. It's a call to slow down, to notice the Eleanors in our lives, those who may seem fine but crave connection. By steeping in their moments, we honor their humanity and enrich our own. Let's cherish these quiet bonds and create them where we can. What's a time someone's presence changed your day, or when you stayed for someone else? Share your story in the comments. I'd love to read it. If this moved you, please like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon to join our community of storytellers. Let's keep spreading the beauty of human connection, one Thursday at a time.